Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Steve Herman. I'm the South Asia Bureau Chief of the Voice of America and the moderator for this panel this afternoon, What Are Young Leaders Bringing to the Development Debate? If you could put your mobile phones on vibrate, and panelists, perhaps, I think most of you have already done it, keep them away from your microphones or they'll start interfering with the sound, perhaps. We were discussing among ourselves that this does sound like a bit of a vague and yet broad topic, and hopefully we'll be able to drill down to some degree and, if not reach some conclusions or recommendations, perhaps give all of us a little bit of insight as to what is going on in India and whether, with a new generation of leadership in the country, that we will see further progress in development. Let me introduce our distinguished panelists with us this afternoon, who themselves sort of fit the bill as young leaders of their own right. In the middle, we have Farzana Haque, who is the global head of large accounts at Tata Consultancy Services and is also a young global leader of the World Economic Forum. Just to my right is Murali Prahalad, who is the general manager of the Cellular Analysis Business Unit, based in Eugene, Oregon, and grew up in the United States, so perhaps a little bit different perspective on things from perhaps most of the people in the room who've spent the bulk of their lives in India. And we also have someone actually from the political sector, a member of the All India Congress Committee, Karti Chidambaram. Thank you. And also one of the leading lights in the health sector in India, helping to really push forward the health delivery system in the country, the managing director from Fortis Healthcare, Shavender Mohan Singh. First, I think we'll, if there's no objections from Farzana, we'll have you kick off for a few minutes and make some opening remarks.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's a privilege and an honor to be here, and we would, as a panelist, try and cover up what we think are some of the issues that development in India today faces. I have lived most of my life in London and New York. I moved a year and a half back, and one of the reasons of the move was the great belief of India as an idea. The power that India can become is humongously huge, and we are at the tipping point in history where if we all as leaders, irrespective of whether you're talking about politics, government, public sector, private sector, if we all get our act right, this is a defining moment in history. Coming to the three things that I have, just to run off what we think are in terms of development. Secularism, I know this is not something that would come as development, but the erstwhile third world countries or developing countries have all moved ahead, and we are still talking about very divisive politics. I think one of the most critical things that faces India today is a laser focus of the economic development. The development of the country in terms of its economic strength, the election of leaders in terms of the performance and the merit that they bring to the citizens of India, rather than on religion and caste and states that we come from. I think it's very important that leaders now define themselves as Indians first, and then as religion and state and caste. The other thing that I have in mind is education. If you just look at the U.S., Stanford was the basis of why Silicon Valley was born. Even today, MIT incubates around 200 companies a year. So, and that all adds to the economic development or prosperity of a country. And somehow in India, we have just not got our act right. During the debate, I'll get into it more, but to start off with, I guess, education, secularism, and also to get our judiciary right. A law-abiding citizen in India should feel safe, should feel secure, should be able to have mental peace to go out and live the best life that they can. Our judiciary processes right from execution whether it's the police or the, the judiciary system per se needs another overhaul. So these are some of the three things that I have in mind while we have the debate. So shall we move on?
You've got a couple more minutes.
Oh, I have. I'm like, am I talking too much? One of the things in education that is fundamental is not only the primary and the secondary, but also our higher education. Today, the likes of Infosys and TCS and Fortis and Bharti or Telco are doing that well and are ruling the roost on a global platform is because of an educated workforce. Sadly and unfortunately, a lot of this workforce had to go abroad to get that kind of education. We need to create educational institutes in India which will focus on innovative, which will focus on delivery of world-class projects, on world-class products. We need to have, from a government perspective, put up regulatory committees which will ensure that you get the best in class in terms of education, in terms of whatever industry we are looking at, to come and look at the projects which are getting implemented in India by government in terms of programs. There was a very small study, and I'm sure lots of McKinseys and Bains have gone ahead and done that. When 2004 and 2005, someone went to just see the government-run schools. Half of them were not even there. 1 out of every 4 state-run school, the teacher is not there. So simple things like these, which the new generation of leadership, the new generation of politicians should ensure that, besides accountability, besides transparency and corruption, I think simple things like project management skills, decisive decision-making skills, involving stakeholders, running it like a company is something that the government should ensure while they are implementing education programs. The one thing that India has going for it is its labor force, which is not only skilled but very, very aspirational. Even if you go into the interiors of India, you will have an Indian put everything at stake for a good education. They don't want the government to fail them, and sadly so today the government is failing. If we don't get our primary education right, which is the input for a higher education, it's very difficult to have the next Microsoft and Google and the big companies out of India. You don't need an Indra Nooyi to go to America to become an Indra Nooyi. She should be born and made out of an Indian company and Indian perspective. So from an education standpoint, that is one. The judiciary, which I'm very, very passionate about, if you just arbitrarily pick up a paper on a day, you see and you get a sense that the law is for the haves and there's a different law for the have-nots. As a law-abiding, as a normal citizen of this country, when I pick up the paper, I should feel the same fear and the same security that maybe a very powerful person or the support staff that comes to my house. A single judge bench, this takes in a lot of drain on the system, the process, the appeal process that goes into years, the backlog of cases which are there, the law which gets interpreted in various ways. One of the things I genuinely and definitely feel is, you have to increase the pay structure of the workforce of the police. It's sad, it's really sad to see post 26/11, the people who are guarding that, those monuments have to live like in shanties on the road. Unless you get the grassroots level going strong and feeling a sense of pride of being in India and actually defending the country, very difficult to say, law will do very well. Our government colleges of law, need to be completely refurbished. This is like one of the last things in India you will see someone, getting really good at, except a few institutes. The kind of, the structures you have for both content of law and execution of law needs to be done up.
Thank you very much. We'll go into this a little bit more, I'm sure, in the next hour. Why don't we go to Murali next?
All right. So can you hear me in the back? Okay. So I think, thank you, Steve. I should probably begin my comments by saying that whatever I say, by definition, will be the views of an outsider. I, like Farzana, have spent a great deal of my life, if not most of my life, in the United States, so I certainly don't have to experience any of the issues I'm going to speak about on a day-to-day basis. So at best, my comments can be taken as hopefully those of a distant and dispassionate person who still has an abiding affection for India. With that said, if someone were to say, what were the two things that this generation of Indian leadership should really focus on as kind of non-negotiable agenda items that maybe should try and cut across party lines as part of a common agenda, I would say the first is fixing the issue of corruption in its broadest sense, and the second is moving from a framework of policy that tries to define and focus on groups to one that focuses on the individual. And let me kind of explain why I chose those two. I think some of the elements of the corruption piece Farzana alluded to, whether it's with the judiciary and how well we implement education and so forth. And there was a phenomenal panel this morning looking at, has corruption become a way of life in India? And there was tremendous passion and heated debate on that. And there were some very innovative solutions proposed. But the reason I bring it up is that no matter how innovative, new, and far-reaching any agenda or policy this next generation of leadership will come up with, the ability to execute and deliver on that will be fundamentally crippled unless we figure out how to restore our institutions to some level of functioning capability. And so this is no longer some trivial thing that can be excused as an economic nuisance or some fact of life, the Indian way, if you want to call it, right, for people who are particularly cynical. And the reason I say that we can't brush it aside is that every institution from national, state, and local has been severely compromised by this. So I'm going so far as to say that what is at risk if it doesn't get fixed in this generation is the very integrity of the country. And maybe let me repeat myself on that. I really believe that what is at risk is the very integrity of the country. And let me explain why. There was a great session earlier in one of the panels about Naxalism, for example, and how this is taking root in places where all institutions have collapsed. The fact of the matter is that one of the biggest contributors to that collapse is fundamentally our system of corruption and how it permeates so many of the institutions. I mean, how do you have, again, districts with education budgets and no schools? Healthcare budgets and no healthcare. Places where there are minimum wage laws that are routinely flaunted and subverted, or police and judiciaries that have been so compromised that either they just don't defend people, or fundamentally they become the silent accomplices to some tremendous outrages that I think we're hearing about. So it shouldn't come as a shock to us that the most destitute and rebellion-stricken portions of the country also end up being the most corrupt. I was fascinated when I was on a plane to India about a month ago, and they had a cover of India Today that said, "Is Pakistan a failed state?" I think this generation of leaders is going to grow up and come into their own in a world where India is surrounded by failed states, Pakistan, Nepal, Bangladesh, Burma, you name it. But what's more troubling is that corruption is creating failed states within India. So the red corridor, which everyone likes to talk about, is one such example, and it's growing. So my basic premise is if we don't get this right, this is going to make a broader and broader swath of this country fundamentally ungovernable. And if you cannot govern a country, you don't have a country. And that's why I say we got to get a solution on this. Now, the corollary, if one were to accept that as a premise, is to say that graft in all of its forms must fundamentally be treated as treason. Now, I realize that's an exceptional statement, but you cannot, on one level, call yourself a nationalist and a deshabhakt, if you will, and then engage in activities that fundamentally undermine the state at the same time. So every time I come to India, I'm fascinated by this notion of anti-national, this term, right? Because it's often used to label terrorists or terrorist sympathizers. But part of attacking the corruption problem is not just strengthening institutions or finding novel ways to kind of rectify it. I think we have to change our lens a little bit about how we view this from a moral standpoint. So if you take, for example, this anti-national label, I ask this audience, why is it used so sparingly? And let me give you an example. If I have a Ministry of Defense bureaucrat who buys substandard equipment for Jawans on the front lines, is that not an anti-national act? If I'm a building inspector and take a bribe for violating building and safety codes from, let's say, a real estate developer who is building a commercial apartment complex, a highway or flyover, eventually those buildings, bridges, and flyovers will collapse, and they will kill and maim with the same effect as someone who actively planted a bomb. Right? If I'm a bureaucrat in charge of a health budget and I deny the children of that district routine vaccinations or medicines that can save their lives from preventable disease, is that in impact any different from actively releasing a biological agent as an act of terror? We have to start asking some of these very basic questions, Because and it's not forgiving common society either. If I'm willing to offer a bribe to subvert the common good, is that also not an anti-national act? So maybe my stance may seem extreme in the common parlance of India, but that is really how I believe we have to start looking at this issue. Because, you know, in the previous government, we talked about a common minimal program. Maybe we've got to start talking about common minimal standards. What should governance really entail? And so if this generation is serious about getting on with the program of development, you've got to address this issue. The second point gets to what I mentioned earlier about thinking in terms of individuals and not groups. So as an outsider coming in, I'm always fascinated by how we've been able to create a modern form of tribalism by having these government-sanctioned prefixes, right? So Dalit girl, Brahmin boy, Muslim woman, Adivasi something else. We're all defined by these prefixes. And very much to Farzana's point, I think it's about time we just got on with building an Indian identity, right? And now this is not deny the various sub-identities that make this country culturally rich, but also it's not meant to try to wipe away the real suffering and injustice that have been felt by different groups. But really my premise is somewhat different. If we actually address the needs, wants, and rights of every individual, it's my belief the group itself gets taken care of. But the converse is not necessarily true. I can have a policy well-intentioned toward any group, but it's not clear to me it's going to percolate down to any given individual. And the whole debate right now is about region, group, subcaste, you know, religion, whatever you want to define it as. But I think this policy has a more insidious consequence. And that is, I think it dehumanizes all of us in some degree. And let me explain why. If I were to look at a kid who is maybe the age of my 2-year-old daughter in a village or a slum somewhere, if I started seeing that child as an Indian first, maybe I can start to empathize with them and say, you know what, that kind of looks like my kid. Maybe they have the same needs, wants, aspirations, etc. But the minute they get homogenized into one of these labels, it becomes all too easy to stereotype all of us in general and completely misunderstand every one of us in particular. So I think part of this developing this new India is about getting past this obsession with these labels and developing some empathy so we can all look at each other face to face as Indians and start getting on with the task of building a country where every single person can live a fulfilled and I think equitable life. So I think those were the two for me that would be the non-negotiables.
Great, Murali. I'm sure we'll get some response from the audience on that a little bit later. Next, Karti Chidambaram.
Thanks, Steve. I'd actually like to take a step back and perhaps focus on the proposition or the question placed before us. If I may, I might actually read out a few lines which has been placed. It says, in the last few years, and especially with the induction of several young MPs in the new government formed in 2009, there has been much debate on the role of the youth in Indian politics. Are these young, often foreign-educated, ambitious leaders likely to usher in the winds of change into Indian politics? Or are they already abiding by the business-as-usual mantra, fighting elections on the lines of caste, religion, and creed? I'd actually like to pick on a few points from this question/proposition placed in front of us. First of all, I don't think several young MPs have been inducted into government. Our government is still very, very old. If I may recall that only 3 young MPs from the Congress party have been inducted into government. The average age of the Indian cabinet is far older than the average age of any Western democracy, or by global standards, our average age of the cabinet is very, very old. So it's first of all an erroneous assumption to think that young people are in government. Yes, there are perhaps a few young MPs in parliament, but most of these young MPs are inheritors of political legacies. Very few of them are first-generation politicians. Most of them are inheritors of very, very strong either national or regional legacies. So this is not some sign of some mushrooming great democracy which is happening in India, where young educated people have just suddenly come in and have taken over politics. It's not true. Most of the young people, particularly the ones who are showcased in the media, particularly in the English-speaking media, are all clearly inheritors of large political legacies. And the question is, are these people setting the agenda for politics today? I am afraid not. I don't think the young inheritors or the young MPs in parliament are setting the agenda for politics. Politics is still dominated by the party structure. Parties have rather fixed positions on most issues, and regional parties are are rather focused on regional and sub-regional issues than on national issues. So it is completely erroneous to think that these young politicians or young MPs are setting the agenda for India or completely changing the face of way Indian politics is run. Most of them have to toe the party line. It is very, very difficult in Indian parliamentary democracy to defy the party and to survive in this political system. And these young people, when they go and contest elections, still have to rely on the party machinery and the old party tactics to win elections, on the alliances, on old loyalties, and on the same tested and tried tactics. There are no new tactics, or there's no new breaking ground on the election victories of any of these young people. So I don't think there's been some great change which has happened because the young people have come. One change which has come is, yes, I think there is a section of the population which sort of felt very disaffected by politics, is now able to identify with certain people who they think are people like them. They speak English, they probably are Western educated. I mean, in Farzana was very surprised that I came in a suit here. I mean, so at least he's able to identify with somebody who doesn't dress according to the norm, who probably speaks a different language. But are we setting the agenda? Are we completely changing the face of politics in India? No, we are not. And is it going to be easy to do that? No. I mean, I completely agree with all the issues which Murali said, which are confronting India. And Farzana had a whole list of woes right from all branches of the state which have problems. Yes. But are these young people today in command to make a change? I don't think they are. But there is definitely hope for the future, because these perhaps showpiece young people will rekindle or perhaps kindle a newfound interest in politics. Maybe other young people will be inspired to come into politics. Maybe they will take up the politics because they see people who they can identify with. Within the party I belong to, there is now a concerted effort to bring in first-generation young people into politics. In fact, the Youth Congress has been, under Rahul Gandhi's general secretaryship, has been doing a nationwide campaign to induct young people in. But the results of this efforts will only be seen in time to come, and I don't think at the moment we have some sort of, we are at some sort of watershed point where there's great changes happening. I agree that young people are prisoners of the political system, have to operate in a political system which the old rules haven't changed very much. But if they can break out of that party positions and come to some sort of a national common program, that will be great. But is it easy to do that? No, it's not easy to do that, not in the present circumstances.
Thank you, Karti. Shvendra Mohan.
Well, I think if I look at the topic that we're talking about today, what are young leaders bringing to the development debate, it does lead you to kind of look at what is happening in the political scene. And I think just as Karti mentioned, there's a big, I think, gap in terms of the way we look at it from data and the people that we see in these positions versus what's probably happening actually in reality. And I'll just throw some data to support Karti's point. In the current 15th Lok Sabha, we have 300 of the 544 odd first-time MPs, which to my mind is a telling sign in itself. The fact that there's over 60% of the current political elected leadership that is actually the first time in the parliament. You look at how many people are there in the under 40 age group. You're talking about only 76 people in the under 40 age group. That's a pretty sharp contrast to what we generally get to hear about a lot of people coming into parliament. Unfortunately, compare that to the 14th Lok Sabha. You're 76 people compared to 92 people in the previous Lok Sabha. So you're actually lesser people under the age of 40 this time than you actually had before. And therefore, I think some of these statistics are telling a story about actually what is going on when we talk about young leadership coming into politics. Again, there's a lot of difference between being elected as a parliamentarian to versus having a role in the government or versus having a role in the party. And unfortunately, an MP ticket does not give you any weight or authority as to what's happening in the government or what's the party construct, what's the party mindset, and what's the party ideology going forward. And therefore, you're really left with a ticket to have a debate and a conversation in the parliament, which is in more cases than not governed by what is the party line in that story. And therefore, you look at statistics and participation of these people in the parliament. You're talking about a total participation of 76% across the parliament, which is 73% for the first-time MPs, the 300 odd people that are there, and only 62% for people below the age of 40 who are called the young MPs today, which again varies from, if you look at women as a section, which is actually 67%. So whereas the total average of participation in the parliament is 76%, the young MPs only bring into the debate only 62% of the conversation, and I guess weighted for more generic issues like climate change and environment, more than some of the more contentious issues that are happening on the ground today. So when we look at the young leadership actually coming into fore and whether they're actually changing the color or whether business is as usual, unfortunately the business is not defined by the people being elected on the ground. Perhaps not enough has been done to make it happen, and maybe over time there will be enough volume to make that change get realistic. But at today's date, I don't think by virtue of the fact that youngsters are coming into politics or parliament, the color has changed very significantly. It could happen in the next 5 to 10 years, maybe some efforts that Karti talked about or otherwise, but the color has not changed dramatically as yet because the cabinet, the ministers, and the government and the party officials really do still decide the agenda. I think so in that context, I want to switch the conversation from being one of looking at politicians or first time or otherwise MPs as to what's happening in the development debate to actually say the role of just young leadership. What is their role in the development debate? Because it obviously seems that if you're going to wait for the former to happen, it's probably going to take a lot longer. And therefore, I think really the conversation that we probably should be having is what is the role that we can play as common citizens to the society in our different roles and engagements to actually have a development debate. Both Farzana and Murali have talked pretty extensively in what needs to happen. And there's reform that's required, whether it's administrative reform or legal reform. There's education focus that's required, there's health focus that's required, infrastructure, something that we're all probably complaining about. I would hope that half this room would be filled up if there was no traffic jam for people to get here and so on and so forth. And I think we have to figure out our roles in this game as to what we need to do to make it happen. Part of it is obviously to vote and use our franchise to get the right people there, but also understanding the fact that they will be limited and controlled by their environments as they get into the political or party leadership. But what exactly are we going to do to make the change happen, make the development happen? Are we going to participate in our own way to breaking laws, into helping support graft and so on and so forth? Or can we actually start making a difference as individuals and as a group? And I think that's the kind of conversation that I would like to encourage in a forum like this and see in an ideas fest, what are the ideas that we can come up with that actually change the mode rather than just waiting for somebody else to make the change happen.
Thank you. I am seeing some common threads, but let me pick up on something for discussion among the panelists up here to start out, since we do want to look at the topic of the young leaders and their role in pursuing development in this country. I've interviewed a couple of first, second-time MPs who have been appointed ministers of state. They are both from what you would call political hereditary families. That obviously raises the question, even if you have young people coming in, are they really going to have the empathy to push forward a development agenda? Or I lived in Japan for 17 years, and a very big problem there with hereditary politicians. People vote for them, sometimes not even aware that they're voting for the son or the grandson, just because they have the same name. I also worked in the state of West Virginia in the United States as a journalist, and there was the same problem there. So this is not a problem, I think, that's unique just to India. But I would like the panelists to talk a little bit about, as you pointed out, getting civilians involved in politics and using their vote to change the course of the country. But is it possible for people who aren't raised in this political environment to break in and become future political leaders in this country?
See, by and large, most political parties, or almost all political parties in this country, are family private limited. That's the truth. I mean, if you go from Kashmir to Kanyakumari, if you look at every political party, they are family private limited. This democratic exercise must happen within political parties. There have been attempts in some political parties to make this happen. One must give credit to Rahul Gandhi, even though he perhaps is the biggest inheritor in this country, is actually making efforts to democratize the Youth Congress. But that's not an effort which will show results in the parent party. But he's actually making an effort in the Youth Congress. But if you look at every other political party, they are closed shops. The top leadership is not available to anybody who wants to walk in. I mean, I'm sure you can walk into TCS and aspire to be the managing director, CEO of TCS. I don't know about Fortis, but you can do that in.
Neither do I know about Fortis.
You can do that in TCS, but you can't do that in most political parties in India.
Don't fish for a job.
No, I'm not looking for a job, and I'll sit outside and But most political parties, the growth path will stop at some point of time. because it's the top jobs are only reserved for members of a certain family. Because, and this is not an accusation which one can only make on one particular political party, because most political parties have this. So unless there is a serious effort to democratize political parties, you really not see a new crop of leaders coming in through the political process. They will all come in, but they will all stagnate at a level. They will not take over the leadership of the party. But there have been standout examples of people who have come in through the political process without being inheritors. But the sad thing, what happens is once they come in, they perpetuate legacies after them. I mean, that's been the case with many, many grassroots level leaders who actually become leaders of masses, but then what happens is they don't necessarily allow somebody else to come in through the same system. So the real democratic exercise must happen within political parties. And for that to happen, I mean, the Election Commission does mandate that political parties must have elections within themselves, must have membership drives and things like that. But in reality, that does not happen in the truest sense. So if there is a change, it has to happen within political parties. And do I see that happening in the short run, or is there any will to happen across political parties? No, I don't see that happening. But do I see some hope within the Congress party? Yes, I definitely see some hope within the Congress party, especially with what's happening in the Youth Congress.
Okay. Anybody else want to pick up on that?
No, I agree to what Karti is saying, and I'm meeting him for the first time, and I'm genuinely very impressed that this generation of politicians come up with a very clear thought process. They're aware of their shortcomings, they're vocal about the shortcomings, and they're working. You know, most of the times, and when I hear my father's generation, you know, politics is something like you don't talk about. People from good families, educated families don't get into it. It's an inherited thing. And this is, you know, coming from a family which is very deeply involved with social development in this country. And I think it is cynicism, I think it's the lack of faith in whatever the system is, that, you know, that generation just doesn't, it's nice armchair politics to sit and talk, but not involved. But when you meet people like Karti, you see what Rahul Gandhi is doing today. When you go to even an average college in Bhopal or somewhere, and you see people looking at politics as a career, not to fend for themselves, but to do something for the society and for India as a nation, I think it's a very positive way to go. But I guess it's a long, long drive before, you know, you have an average Murali or Farzana or Shivender get in and get to the top. But the fact that the sense of community spirit is there in this generation, even the fact that someone like, you know, us besides Karti, who is not from this you know, industry, if politics can be that, is today sitting and genuinely thinking of what can be done to make India a superpower and to democratize political parties. I think it's a step in the right direction.
Murali, you wanted to interject?
Yeah, I think one of the things we all can do as well, certainly young people, is first of all stop being so reverent to the system. Right, a little bit of irreverence wouldn't hurt, and I think in some of the previous sessions, you know, I think some of the panels were giving the kind of very standard, tried and true answers, and it's about time we started pushing back, because it's not a question of if the talent is here to make the change, or that do we have the ability to get answers to the questions. For me, the real point is, are we asking the right questions? Right, so you know, it's the basic stuff. Why is it 62 years after freedom, 600 million people still don't have a toilet? Right? I mean, why is it that you know, after 10 years of discussion, we still don't have fully implemented VAT? Or do we really have the appropriate civil service systems to build a modern nation? Or is it something that's better suited to the 19th century? And if we want an industrial economy, you know, why don't we have standard norms for land procurement? You know, these may seem like very fractured questions, but the problem is we're not asking them hard enough and pushing hard enough to drive the answers. And to the extent that political parties are entrenched, if one can say in the 70s that politics was something to the left of self-interest, today it's probably something to the right of self-interest. So hopefully by framing the issues in the right way and forcing attention on some of the more basic questions and not accepting the tried and true party answers, right? Because that's the bigger problem too. It's not just that people come from entrenched families and parties, but they keep throwing up the same solutions to the new problems, right? It's sort of this habitual reflexive notion. I got a group that's restive, throw them a quota. I got something else, make another state. I mean, there's a whole slew of these things which we see in front of us that needs to be said, hold on, folks. Are we really getting the right solution for the right problem? And are we doing it because it's right or what we just know how to do?
Shivender, do you think that breaking the status quo, a little bit more irreverence, is possible, going to make a difference?
Well, I do agree with the fact that it's difficult to pull out of the norm and start doing something different unless it doesn't happen in a group mentality. But what I think is essential today to actually make a change happen is to make people more accountable. I think it's a once in a 5-year term conversation that happens. People come and give their promises and so on and so forth, and they're coming back 5 years down the line and saying exactly the same thing. And it's not good enough at that point to turn around and say, because of lack of development, a new party is chosen because it's going to be 5 more years of delay. I think we need to figure out how we can engage with the people that we select and elect as representatives to actually be accountable for what they do, not once in 5 years, but every time that they engage with the community and have a formalized structured mechanism every 6 months or a year, they actually come back and tell their community as to what is happening. This time, for the first time, I thought the media actually put together a whole conversation around a 100-day plan and what is the delivery against that plan. But I felt it fizzled out a little too fast before it happened. So there was a big bang on 100 days over the first government and what was promised and what happened. And I was expecting a whole scorecard to arrive after that so that people feel more accountable. But I didn't see any of that happen going forward. So if there is a commitment that in a 100-day plan there something will happen, then there should be something at the end of the 100 that says, okay, this is what we said. It could be 20%, that's okay, but this is what it is, and this is what we're going to do over the next 3 months, 6 months to make that change happen. So if we are not able to engage with the people that we elect and with the people who are running the country, then we're not doing our job because we're not asking them to be accountable, and therefore we're giving them a free ride.
Accountability. The media would seem would be the natural voice to bring this forward, but the media, my experience as a member of the media also, is that the media is easily distracted here, and when they do focus on these things, it's a minuscule point, and it usually deals more with personalities rather than the issues.
The media is not above board on any of the issues. In fact, the media is as corrupt as any other institution which has eroded in this country. So to give great credit to media and to think somehow they are the last bastions or holders of virtue in this country is completely an erroneous proposition. I mean, I know there are many members of the media here, and you don't know the rot which is setting in amongst you all. So, and the media is, because of 24/7 television, I think everything is reduced to a soundbite. There is no substantive debate on anything. Right. They want instantaneous quotes or quips on every issue. And the good thing for us in politics is every issue is forgotten in 24 hours. We can get on with business as usual because nothing stays in anybody's mind anymore because there's an overkill of information. And nobody can digest information because you're getting information from television, from internet, from mobile phones, newspapers. I mean, it's just an overkill. And the other thing is that in India, we always talk about national issues, but one must understand there's really no more national politics. It's only a sum of state politics. I think we must come to that realization sooner rather than later, to somehow set national agendas and forget the fact that there are states, and states will have unique needs, and there will be unique political situations in states, and to just focus on national agendas you will never reach any conclusions, because most of the delivery in this country, or most of the things you complain about, are actually to do with state governments. It's not to do with national government, because the national government, in my opinion, is the most irrelevant government to our lives. The most relevant government to our lives is the local body and the state government. And unfortunately, debates in these kinds of forums, or amongst people who speak English and in the English media, is always focused on national government, and never on local government and never on state governments. And even people, when they talk about coming into politics, they'll always talk about coming and contesting for parliament, and not really go and contest the local body elections and state elections. I know it's quite fashionable for people from the corporate world to prop up once in 5 years and say that they want to contest a seat in parliament, but the same people will never volunteer to go and actually run a councillor's post, or they would not go and run an MLA seat during the local body elections. So the real focus, if you really want to see a qualitative change in the way we actually deal with life every day, it's really the local government and state governments which need to be focused on, and not really on national agendas and on things which the English media is propagating as the biggest issue. I mean, I've been involved in many election campaigns, and I was involved in the last election campaign as well, and believe me, in Shivganga, 26/11 was no issue at all. I mean, if you read English papers, you think that's David Headley and 26/11 is setting the agenda for this country. But if you go to rural India, that's not the issue. The issues are still delivery of roads, on electricity, on water, on basic schools, and most issues are still completely in the hands of state and local governments. It's really a sum of local issues which make up this national issue. There's really no national issue anymore in India, and elections are completely won and lost on purely local issues.
But my hunch is that most people in India would probably know who represents them in the Lok Sabha, but as far as their MLA or their city council member, they probably have no idea.
That probably is the case in an urban area. In a rural area, they would actually know the MLA and the... This is an urban malaise, particularly among the English-speaking upper middle classes. They would not know anybody in the local government. But if you go to a rural area, they'd probably connect more with the local MLA or the councillor more than the MP.
Just one more thing before I'll open it up to the audience. Is it possible, though, for someone, if the issues really are local, and of course there's that old adage that all politics is local, but is it possible for a young leader, based on what you've already mentioned about how hard it is to break in to these political franchises, you seem to think that there's the windows open a little bit more with Congress, and some people might debate that as well. But what...
I didn't say for the top job. I just said within the party.
Okay. But what can... Say there are people here in the audience or people in villages who want to become a politician and start out at the local level. What advice would you give to them?
I would personally say that you must join a political party. Because there are a lot of well-meaning people who want to bring about political change, but they are loath to joining a political party. It's like almost...
How many people in the audience are a member of a political party?
There are a couple of members of parliament here. Let them raise a hand.
Okay. We should have excluded any elected politicians.
There are two.
Okay.
Right. I think you have to join a political party. It's like saying that I like to play cricket, but I won't join a team. But in parliamentary democracy, in order to make a difference, in India, if you notice, among the 543 MPs, I think there'd be hardly one, if not two, independent MPs. It is impossible for independents to win elections in India, because the political party structure is very, very strong. It's very entrenched. So in order to make a change, I think the first step is to join a political party and work your way up. That's the starting point. But most upper middle class educated people won't do that.
I was just going to ask Shivender, would you do that, or is that getting your hands dirty?
No, I don't think it's a question of getting your hands dirty. I think from a development perspective, from a delivery perspective, you're willing to take on any job as long as you have the responsibility and authority to get it done. You're not doing it for a title or just for a public perspective. So he talked about mayors and local authorities and MLAs and so on and so forth. I think there'll be a lot more people in this country willing to take on responsibility. If they had a clear-cut responsibility and an accountability as well as an authority to get the job done. If you're going to get into the malaise of the corruption, the bureaucratic system to get simple things done, then there's no point. But I have a lead-on question to Karti from his comment. I mean, if government and politics is all about local and state level stuff, then why is it in 20 years MLAs and MPs can't deliver basics to their constituencies? Why is water, power, house, shelter, roads still an issue after 50 years, 60 years of independence? I mean, why are we not able, if it is so local and if life actually gets defined by the guys who vote for us, why are we not able to deliver the goods? It's not that difficult. That's why there's such churn in state governments. You see, it's very difficult for a state government to get re-elected. Very few state governments get re-elected in India. There's always a churn at the state levels. So that's an accountability issue. The question is, I mean, you see the ground level. Why is it so difficult for us to deliver the basics to our constituents? Because we don't, see, we have to have diffused leadership in this country. I mean, I put this theory as not leadership in the mountain, but leadership at the doorstep. We need to have leadership at various levels of society. We need to have leadership at every level of the political process and every level of the decision-making process, and not just have one messiah sit in Delhi or wherever and think that India is going to change because that one person has got a great vision. We need to diffuse leadership a lot more, and unfortunately in India, authority and leadership is not yet diffused. It's still very centralized, be it within political parties or be it within state governments or be it within the central authority. We need to diffuse leadership a lot more, and if you diffuse leadership a lot more, perhaps we'll see a little bit better efficiencies in getting things done.
Well, I think one of the other questions that we have to come to terms with is that we now have two generations in this country who have seen political dysfunctionality as the norm. So the problem also with local politics is that it's not any better than national politics. In fact, there's lowest level of standards at the national level and get lower at the local level.
Absolutely.
And then you go to the villages and you see that level of operating, and you seem to think that's normal. So the base and what we use as a reference points themselves, I mean, that's maybe the biggest consequence of what's happened in the past generation or two, is that the systematic lowering of expectation and standard has left us in a pretty tight bind. So based on what you're seeing at the local level, how do we also kind of reset the caliber, right, or reset the baseline, if you will, of what people should be expecting, because that's the other point, right? You know, so when the next party comes in, they're better than the previous one, but you know what, the previous one wasn't that good anyway. So marginal improvement doesn't really make a dent. So how do we start handling some of those problems?
It's almost like a menu card in a restaurant. You know, people can only choose what's offered to them, and people can't choose something which is off the menu. Today, what's being offered by political parties in terms of caliber of candidates and agendas by political parties is very, very low, and people are forced to choose what's put in front of them. So, and until that a newer option is given to them, they won't be able to choose the newer option. And the newer option won't come if newer blood doesn't come into the political system. And the newer blood won't come into the political system if we don't join political parties. So that's the bottom line.
Well, I think there's one additional option that we need to give our citizens that actually exercise a franchise, which is actually the option of not voting for anyone if they don't like their candidates. And we don't have the option of abstaining from voting for a particular
Some
person.
countries you have none of the above on the ballot.
We have to choose the best or the worst that exists. So if you don't like the agenda of any other parties, you don't like the backgrounds, you don't like the criminal track records, then you have the choice of not voting for anyone and still going and exercising your franchise. And I don't think we have that option as a country.
There is something known as 49-0, but that does not negate the election if many people vote for 49-0. There is some provision for that. But there is
there needs to be a minimum threshold.
But the law doesn't negate the election if 49-0 is greater than the number of votes polled. And 49-0 is, there's no button in the electronic machine for 49-0. You just go register it. Yeah.
Which
that
allows fraud to happen at any which way. But that leaves a loophole open for fraud to happen
at the electronic voting machine level. Let's be very clear. The opportunity for fraud is very, very minimal. In fact, we must be proud of the electronic voting system we have in India. It's a very robust machine, and in terms of tampering with it is impossible because they're all standalone machines. So in fact, our verdicts through electronic voting is rather foolproof. But this 49-0 is not incorporated in the machine. It's on a register. And perhaps that could be incorporated in the machine in the years to come.
Unfortunately, we're out of time for this session, but please stay in your seats. There's not going to be a break in this room since we've gone a little bit over time, but thank you. Murali, Karti, Shavinder, and this is a debate I think will be going on for many years, and maybe this panel will be back a little bit grayer in the future to assess the younger leaders. Thank you.